Inserting results graphs. The results graphs functionality in at-risk allows you to add a graph of simulation results to a worksheet. The graph generated is the same as generated in the results summary window. Many arguments to this function are optional. If optional arguments are not entered, the function creates a graph using the current default settings in the results summary window for any omitted argument. 115. Go to blank tab charts and place your cursor on cell B2. Notice the gray range B2, J17. This is the rectangular range where we will place the first results graph for total project cost histogram of cell model K21. 116. Click on the Insert Function button of at-risk's ribbon. Select the Risk Results Graph function under Simulation Result Functions under Statistic Functions. The following window appears. 117. On the first parameter, Data Source, click to make a reference to Model K21. Make a fixed reference by clicking F4 so that Excel will include $signs to the reference and make it absolute or fixed. 118. On the second parameter, default range, select the range B2J17. Leave this range variable as it is. 119. The third optional parameter is graph type, which is optional. By leaving this parameter blank, at-risk will assume 0, which is the default histogram chart. Otherwise, you can always click on the lower left-hand corner of this window and retrieve help on this function. When doing so, at-risk will take you to the help file where you could be able to read on graph types. Notice the 20 different graph types available here from 0 to 19. Write a 0 on this cell in order to select a histogram. 120. Leave the rest of optional parameters in blank and proceed to OK on this function in order to exit and return to the cell, which will now look like this. Equals risk results graph, open parenthesis, model $K$21, comma, B2 to J17, comma, 0, close parenthesis. This function will generate a JPEG image chart on top of the range B2 J17 only after a simulation has been executed. For the time being, the cell will only remain with its function. 121. Copy this function from cell B2 to cell L2. Edit the cell on L2 to change its third parameter from a 0 to a 1. Graph type 1 generates a cumulative ascending S-shaped chart curve, also called a percentile chart. Remember, these graphs will only be created after the simulation has been run. 122. Now, copy the selected range B2, L2, and paste it on rows 20, 38, and 56. We will now edit respectively these 6 pasted functions in order to modify different types of graphs for each one of them. 123. On cell B20, change graph type from 0 to 3. This will eventually create a regression coefficient tornado chart for total project cost on the range B20, J35. 124. On cell L20, change graph type from 0 to 14. This will eventually create a change in outputs mean tornado chart for total project cost on the range L20, T35. 125. On cell B38, change chart graph type from 0 to 4. This will eventually create a Spearman Rank Correlation coefficient tornado chart for total project cost on the range B38, J53. 126. On cell L38, change graph type from 0 to 11. This will eventually create a regression mapped values tornado chart for total project cost on the range L38 T53. 127. On cell B56, change graph type from 0 to 19. This will eventually create a contribution to variance tornado chart for total project cost on the range B56 J71. On cell L56, change graph type from 0 to 15. This will eventually create a contribution to variance spider chart for total project cost on the range L56 T71. 129. Now proceed to run a simulation. Remember, these graphs will not be generated until after the simulation has finished. Once this has happened, you will be able to see the generated graphs on this tab using the respective allocated rectangles. Each one of these graphs has been created as a JPEG file on top of the previously created function. If you remove the image, the underlying function will remain in place. Next time you end another simulation, these results graph functions will be updated with a newly created chart. If you do not remove the images after a simulation has been done, at risk will be careful enough to not start piling up images upon images for each new simulation. It will automatically remove any image before a simulation is performed, and then it will always overlay it with one image file on top of its defined rectangle.